Today, well, we're jumping into a really fascinating piece of analysis that popped up recently.
Yeah, this one definitely caught my eye.
It claims to lay out this surprising interaction between a former U.S. president and Vladimir Putin.
And not just the interaction, but the alleged ripple effects, right, on, global politics.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the timeline presented in this material, step by step.
And then get into the really provocative part, the analysis's claim about who really benefited from everything that happened.
Right. Okay, let's dive in. So the story, as this analysis tells it, it kicks off with something pretty unusual. We're talking June 16th. The former U.S. president is at a G7 meeting, but then he just, leaves after only a few hours.
Which is odd in itself, right? Leaving a G7 summit so early.
Very odd. And he flies immediately back to the United States, lands, holds a press conference. The speed of it all is notable.
It really is. And what the analysis highlights, and this is where it starts getting really interesting, is that right after he gets back, he has a phone call.
With Putin.
With Vladimir Putin. That timing, returning from the G7 and immediately calling Putin, it definitely makes you pause.
It does. And according to this analysis, during that call, Putin makes an offer.
Yeah, get this. He apparently offers to mediate a dispute
between Israel, Iran, and the U.S. And this is before the U.S. even got directly involved in strikes against Iran.
Which is a crucial detail. The offer comes first.
But the former president's response, as it's reported here, it sounds pretty dismissive.
Right. The quote cited is, do me a favor, mediate your own. Let's mediate Russia first.
And then he apparently pivots to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Standard lines, would have never happened if I was president.
And that claim about far more people are dead than have been reported.
Yeah. So on the surface, it looks like Putin offers, Trump dismisses. Simple enough.
But that's just the surface, according to this analysis. It suggests we need to look at what happened next to understand the potential deeper game.
Okay, so that call happens. Then the U.S. does get involved directly.
Right. The analysis moves on to the U.S. strikes on 3 sites in Iran.
And the intelligence assessments discussed here, they say the sites were hit, but not completely destroyed.
Exactly. Damaged, yes, but not fully destroyed is the phrase used. And apparently recent satellite images show, quote, a lot of activity in excavators near ventilation shafts.
So suggesting rebuilding or cleanup efforts started pretty quickly.
That seems to be the implication drawn in the material, yeah. Significant restoration work underway.
Okay, that's one thing. But then there's this other detail from the analysis, which is, frankly, huge.
The uranium.
Yeah. The claim is the Iranians managed to move 900 pounds of uranium away before the strikes.
And its current location, unknown.
I mean, 900 pounds, that's a massive amount. If true, the strategic implications are just enormous. Absolutely enormous. It completely changes the narrative about the effectiveness of those strikes, doesn't it? Yeah. If they secured that much material beforehand.
It really does. And this is where, according to the analysis, things get even more complicated, especially with the former president's rhetoric.
Because his tune changes after the strikes.
Completely. We go from maximum pressure, talk to him allegedly suggesting things like, let China do better deals now with Iran.
And let China buy the cheap oil now from Iran.
He even recordedly said he'd make China and Iran great again.
Which is quite a statement, given the context.
Right. So the analysis basically asks, if this is the outcome, Iran potentially moving Q material, China getting encouraged to boost ties, isn't Iran actually, better off than before?
And wouldn't China be stronger? That's the core question posed.
So this leads us to the central argument of the analysis we're dissecting. Who benefited?
Exactly. And the analysis is pretty direct. It argues this whole sequence, despite how it might look on the surface, ultimately played out to the advantage of Russia, China, and Iran. Okay, strong claim. What's the evidence presented to back that up?
Well, it points to a few concrete examples. One is the cost to the U.S. of intercepting those Iranian missiles.
Right, you mentioned the Tachad system.
Yeah, the analysis claims the U.S. used about 20% of its THAAD interceptors, costing roughly $1 billion just for that one engagement.
$1 billion. That's a serious expenditure and diversion of resources.
Huge diversion. And it's not just about the money. It's about the stockpile of those advanced interceptors being depleted.
Are there other examples cited? Less obvious ones, maybe?
Yes. Another point raised is Russia's actions in Ukraine around the same time.
What happened there?
The analysis states that Russia managed to take over an area in Ukraine that holds some of the largest lithium deposits in the region.
Lithium, like for batteries. The rare earth stuff.
Precisely. Remember those discussions about rare earth deals with Ukraine? This analysis contends Russia now controls that specific valuable resource.
So the argument connects the dots. Middle East flare-up, U.S. resources diverted.
Russia makes a strategic gain in Ukraine. And so the analysis concludes, quote, it all leads to Vladimir Putin, who benefited from all of this.
And it explicitly names the others.
Yep. It was Putin benefited, it was China that benefited, it was Iran that benefited. That's the direct quote from the material we're looking at.
So what about the former U.S. president? Where does he fit into this who benefited picture, according to the analysis?
His benefit, as framed here, was more domestic propaganda, basically.
How so?
Looking tough, projecting strength, distracting from, as the analysis puts it, his unpopularity at home, photos, posts, that kind of thing. But the strategic gains, it argues, went elsewhere.
Okay. And there was another really controversial point mentioned in the outline regarding Israel.
Yes, the Netanyahu claim. This is definitely one of the more explosive parts of the analysis.
What does it allege?
It claims that Israeli courts postponed Benjamin Netanyahu's criminal case.
Okay.
And it alleges this happened at Donald Trump's request.
Wow. What's the supposed mechanism?
The analysis claims Trump suggested the U.S. would essentially extort Israel, threatening to withhold weapons if the prosecution continued during wartime.
That is a very serious allegation. Does the analysis offer specific proof, or is it connecting perceived events?
It presents it as part of the pattern, connecting observed outcomes, the postponement, the alleged request, the broader context, to argue that actions were taken which benefited specific figures, tying back into the main theme of who gains from these geopolitical shifts. It urges looking at the results.
Understood. So moving beyond the immediate players, Russia, China, Iran, Trump, Netanyahu, the analysis also talks about broader consequences, right? Like the diversion of U.S. focus.
That's a major point. By drawing more U.S. attention and resources to the Middle East crisis.
There's less focus elsewhere.
Exactly. Less resources focused elsewhere is how the analysis puts it. And the two key areas mentioned are Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific.
And while the U.S. is looking towards Iran, the analysis notes Putin is still hitting Ukraine hard.
Tremendously hard. It mentions reports of one of the biggest strikes ever happening, inflicting, quote, tremendous damage.
And it links this back to the former president's stance.
Yeah, it reiterates the point that he has allegedly capitulated to President Putin on Ukraine repeatedly, suggesting a pattern that allows Russia more freedom of action while U.S. focus is split.
And what about the Indo-Pacific? What are the concerns there, according to this material?
The concern highlighted is that U.S. partners and allies in the region think Japan, Australia, others are getting nervous.
Why?
Because they see less U.S. engagement, fewer resources maybe shifted to the Middle East, and they are, quote, really worried about what China's up to.
This connects to NATO as well, doesn't it? The analysis mentioned Japan and Australia missing meetings.
That's right. Even though they aren't NATO members, they're often invited to key meetings as major partners. But they were apparently absent recently.
And the reason given in the analysis?
Fear. Concerns that the former president might use the meeting to extort them or shake them down, bring up new demands about defense spending or trade.
Leading to mixed messages.
Exactly. And a reluctance to even show up if they can't predict what might happen or what might be demanded. It creates uncertainty.
Which leads to the broader point the analysis makes about leadership.
Yeah, that if the U.S. isn't providing consistent, predictable leadership, it creates a vacuum.
A vacuum for others to step in and cause trouble.
Precisely. And that this perceived flip-flopping, sometimes driven by something as simple as a social media post, just creates chaos and confusion. Allies don't know what to expect.
It argues that allies need consistency above all.
Consistency and trust. They need to be able to, quote, trust the word of the president.
There's an anecdote used to illustrate this mixed messages point, isn't there, involving Lindsey Graham?
Yes. The analysis brings this up as a specific example. Graham reportedly talked to the former president about a bill.
A bill for new sanctions on Russia.
Severe ones, like a potential 500% tariff on goods from countries like India or China if they buy Russian oil. A way to hit Putin's funding.
And Graham said Trump told him,
"It's time to move your bill." Sounds pretty clear, right, me? Go ahead.
But there's a catch.
A big one, according to the analysis. Graham also mentioned there would be waivers.
So exceptions could be made.
And who decides on the waivers?
Yeah.
Ultimately, the analysis points out, it would still be up to the former president.
So push the tough bill, but maybe don't actually enforce it.
That's the interpretation presented. A classic mixed message. You tell allies one thing, signal toughness, but leave yourself an out.
And the impact on allies.
The analysis argues it makes them look, quote, stupid. They get assurances, maybe act on them, and then things change with a tweet or a waiver.
So the analysis really doesn't mince words in its conclusion about the former president's actions regarding Russia.
No, it really doesn't. It states very bluntly that the former president is, quote, literally doing everything he can to help Putin.
That's a very strong conclusion to draw.
It is. And it circles back to the core need for allies and partners. Consistency, predictability, being able to trust what the U.S. says and does.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've journeyed through this quite detailed analysis. It paints a picture of, well, a complex sequence of events.
Phone calls, military strikes, resource shifts, political maneuvering.
All of which, according to the specific analysis, consistently led to strategic benefits for Russia, China, and Iran, even if the surface actions seemed confusing or contradictory.
And beyond just who won or lost in the short term, the analysis really stresses the damage done by perceived inconsistency, the potential erosion of trust in alliances, the instability created by unpredictable foreign policy.
It definitely leaves us with a lot to think about. Considering this deep dive, this particular interpretation of events, what does it truly suggest about the future? About international trust, about alliances, especially when consistency and predictability seem to be questioned.
And how might these alleged shifts, if they are indeed happening as described, reshape the global power dynamics we thought we understood?
Definitely some heavy questions to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.